Hello everyone, Agitation Rising here. Today I wanted to make a video about a new Illinois law called the Community Emergency Services and Support Act, aka CESSA, aka the Stefan Watts Act. This law was passed unanimously by both houses and signed into law by Governor J.B. Pritzker in August of 2021. To give you a little background around this law, on February 2nd, 2012, in Calumet City, Illinois, Calumet City police were called to handle a mental health crisis. 5 officers responded to the scene. An autistic boy had got into a tussle with his father. The child's own doctors advised calling the police if he became agitated. By the time police left, the boy was dead, shot by an officer. Stefan Watts, a 15-year-old boy with Asperger's syndrome, had told his father, Stefan Watts, he didn't want to go to school that Wednesday morning. His father responded by taking away the teen's computer and putting it in the basement of their home in the 500 block of Forsyth Avenue. Upset, the teen tussled with his father, who called police around 8:30 a.m. Stephen Watts said he was following instructions given to the family by social workers and doctors who warned that when agitated, the teen should be handled by authorities. The family had followed that advice and called police at least 10 times since June 2010. Quote, Stefan made me mad, Stephen said in an interview. But as soon as he placed the call, he regretted it. Quote, I knew I made a terrible mistake. Knew it. Stephen dialed the dispatcher again and told him not to send help, that he had overreacted, but the police were already on their way. When police arrived, they forced themselves in to perform a quote-unquote welfare check. They went downstairs where Stefan was attempting to get into the locked room with his gaming computer. He had a small butter knife he was using to pick the lock. All parties agree it happened in a matter of seconds. With his father a few steps away, Stefan came from around the corner and moved towards the stairs, within arm's reach of the officers, waving the knife in his hand. One of the officers involved, Officer Hynek, would later say he wasn't running, but he wasn't walking. No one asked Stefan to drop the knife, nor did Officer Hynek use any of the de-escalation techniques he learned during his training. As Stefan came into Officer Hynek's view, Hynek yelled knife, and the officers fired 2 shots at Stefan. The first bullet, fired by Officer Hynek, hit Stefan under his right armpit. The second came from Officer Coffey and struck Stefan in his back, according to the state investigation. The killing was later ruled to be justified by Cook County's state's attorney Anita Alvarez. All 82 of Calumet City's police force had taken a training the year prior regarding how to interact with autistic individuals. Both officers Coffey and Hynek later testified in a deposition that they had received autism-related training just once in the 6 and 17 years respectively they'd been on the force before Stefan's death. In response to this tragedy, the idea of CESSA was sparked. The push to get CESSA implemented was led by Access Living and Advance Your Leadership Power, a group of disabled activists that use their own lived experience to advocate on behalf of disabled people. According to Access Living's research, 10% of 911 calls in Illinois request help with mental or behavioral health emergencies. Since Illinois lacks a coordinated healthcare response service, 911 can only dispatch law enforcement. Law enforcement practices focusing on command and control of a location actually makes many of these emergencies worse. Law enforcement skills are rarely needed as people with mental illnesses are less likely to be violent than people without such a diagnosis. Law enforcement is generally compelled to hospitalize or jail people needing this service, but 90% do not need such an invasive and costly response. These organizers recognized there was a need for an alternative to police response for mental and behavioral health crises. The mobile response service proposed by CESSA is based on the Crisis Action Helping Out on the Streets CAHOOTS model that has operated in Eugene, Oregon for decades. CAHOOTS dispatches teams of medics, either a nurse or an EMT, and a crisis worker who has at least several years of experience in the mental health field, to calls requesting help for mental and behavioral health emergencies. Importantly, they do this without police presence. As we've said before, CAHOOTS is not a co-responder model, it is an alt-responder model. CESSA aims to do the same by creating alternative responder units throughout Illinois. CESSA addresses the health needs of people who are not violent and who are not violating the law by sending support instead of police. There is a bias against mental health compared to physical health. The response to a physical health crisis is a healthcare response, while oftentimes a response to a mental health crisis is criminalized. This is shown by the fact for many municipalities, their county jail is the #1 provider of mental health services. To counteract this thinking, CESSA states, and I'm quoting the law here, "The General Assembly finds that in order to promote and protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public, it is necessary and in the public interest to provide transportation to behavioral health services in a manner that is substantially equivalent to the response provided to individuals who require emergency physical health care. An individual who requires an emergency response to address his or her mental or behavioral health care needs should have the choice of accessing providers trained to address mental or behavioral health crises. Public welfare is best served when the public has access to substantially equivalent emergency response options for all health crises." CESSA draws a new distinction. It says nonviolent, non-criminal mental and behavioral health crises are not threats to public safety, and therefore do not require a police response, but a healthcare response. Just because someone has a diagnosis of mental or behavioral issues does not mean they are a threat to public safety. The alt responders that CESSA will create are expected to 1. Divert from hospitalization or incarceration. 2. Provide on-site care as appropriate. 3. Recommend appropriate referrals for additional support. And 4. Provide transportation to appropriate care settings as directed by the individual receiving care. Instead of attempting to command, control, or criminalize the situation, which is what is seen from police responses, the goal of alt responders is to resolve the conflict or crisis occurring in a way that actually empowers the individual facing said crisis. CESSA stresses against incarcerating or institutionalizing people against their will. Importantly, CESSA does not train police. In fact, the law explicitly states, quote, "Prohibition of use of law enforcement for emergency response or transportation in any jurisdiction that provides a system for emergency response for individual with physical health needs that is distinct from the jurisdiction's law enforcement personnel. Law enforcement shall not be used to provide emergency response for an individual when an individual only requires on-site emergency mental or behavioral health care, transportation to access healthcare, or travel between healthcare providers, except where available." At the same time, CESSA does not prohibit communication between alt responders and police or the 911 system. If the alt responders get a call, police are allowed to be present in the area of the crisis, out of sight or around the corner. This will allow them to quickly respond if the crisis team on the scene believes they require police backup. But what is critical here is that the first response on the scene of a mental or behavioral health crisis is a healthcare response. The healthcare workers are the ones with authority of the scene, and they are responsible for determining whether there is a threat to public safety or not. Now, how will these alt responders function under CESSA? Well, the Illinois Department of Human Services Division of Mental Health shall create emergency response equity committees in each of the 12 Emergency Medical Service or EMS response regions. This will allow each geographic region to develop their own plans for alt responders based on the resources available in their own communities. This includes 1. Provide guidance to emergency services, 4. Prioritizing calls for assistance and setting the standards for appropriate response times for care required. Set appropriate training requirements and staffing minimums for mobile mental health responders, including training in de-escalation and local community services and supports, and in respectful interaction with people experiencing mental behavioral health crises. Also requires training from individuals with lived experience. Adopt guidelines directing when referral to a restrictive care setting is appropriate, and specify regional best practices. It is these EMS regions, under the supervision of the Division of Mental Health, that will develop and regulate the actions of alt responders in various communities, not local police departments. That's all for today. I hope this video was very informative about the new changes that are coming. Like, subscribe, check out the blog Strange Corners of Thought, and help contribute by becoming a patron on Patreon. I will see you on the other side.